Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. We are talking about the NFL draft, which is coming up this week. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we got the whole draft, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Big Ten and why particularly night one and maybe even night two might be a big endorsement of the Big Ten and its competitive nature. We're also going to talk about maybe one of my favorite or not so favorite topics, which is why Ohio State quarterbacks who are really, really good keep falling like rocks in the draft. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, not Facebook. I'm barely on Facebook. I don't know what I'm talking about. Twitter, Instagram. You can send me an email, big10footballtalk@gmail.com. I know it's been a while. It has been a while. I'm hoping as things slow down in my world to kind of get back to more regular posting, maybe once a week. Probably not going to happen until after May, but I'll do a post-draft, post-mortem, if you will. The first thing I want to talk about here, though, is the reality that the night one of the NFL draft might be a ringing endorsement for the Big Ten, depending on how it shakes out. Just looking at a lot of different mock drafts, a lot of mock drafts have a lot of different players from the Big Ten. Players that, I did my NFL Combine winners and losers. I am surprised at where certain players are because I thought maybe the Combine helped players to maybe get to third round, second round consideration. But there's a lot of players that are fringe first rounders or maybe even just locks to go first round. And I'm just going to tell you right now, that should encourage particularly teams that are not like in the upper echelon of the Big Ten, because it tells me that while maybe that different teams don't have a completely stacked roster, these teams have talent and they can develop talent and they have the right coaching staffs in place to at least get more out of their recruits than maybe they once thought. And so that's encouraging to me. Because I think probably 15, 16 years ago, way back when, the problem was it was a massive talent gap between the Big Ten and the SEC. But now I think what we're seeing is that while the SEC, I think, is still ahead, I think we're seeing that in a lot of premier positions, the Big Ten has a lot of cachet. And so that should really be an encouragement, I think. And I think it's going to be a good endorsement. At some point, speaking of the Big Ten, I do want to talk about the new commissioner hire. I just have not been able to do a lot of research. I think just glancing at it, it's a good hire. But I think things are looking up for the Big Ten based off of the abysmal playoff run that was for Ohio State and Michigan. Although Ohio State wasn't really abysmal. I didn't think they'd keep it close. That being said, let me go into the first round and what you might be able to expect on Thursday. While CJ Stroud is tanking, his draft stock is tanking right now, I don't think he's going to escape the top 7 picks. A couple people have him falling out of the top 10. I really doubt it. But if he does, he's still a firm lock to be a first rounder. I would be honestly very surprised if he makes it past 4. You know, the Indianapolis Colts want a quarterback. The Texans are there's a lot of rumors saying that the Texans might not be it. They may not go for a quarterback. A lot of mock drafts are not buying it. Most mock drafts have them picking CJ number 2, although there's several that don't. Some have picking Will Anderson. Others have them picking another quarterback, which we'll talk about later in the podcast. But CJ most likely will be the first pick out of the Big Ten in this draft. Closely behind, a lot of draftniks think that the next person up is not an Ohio State player, not a Penn State player, not a Michigan player, but an Illinois player. Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, cornerback. Remember, that Illinois defense was nasty. And a lot of teams, or a lot of mock drafts, have him going in the top 10. I don't know when. I'm not sure the last time there was an Illinois player picked in the top half of the first round. Maybe Aurelius Ben, maybe back in 2008, 2009. I know that's a long time, but it's been a hot minute since an Illinois player has been in the top half of the first round. So he's, that's a big deal for Illinois to have someone go that high. They had a great season, great second year under Brett Bielema. So a lot of momentum there. Then there's going to be a couple of offensive tackles. Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern, Paris Johnson out of Ohio State. Both of them, in every mock draft I've looked at, I don't think either of them get past 15. Right? They're 2 of the top 4 tackles in this draft. Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright are probably the other 2 that they're in contention there. Darnell Wright, obviously, out of Tennessee. Broderick Jones out of Georgia. So out of the top 4 offensive tackles in this class, 2 are from the Big Ten. And there's several more that could go. We'll talk about that in a minute. Joey Porter Jr., another corner. So that's the second corner. Widely projected to be a first-round pick. The big surprise for me, and he was already rising up to this level. I did not expect it because he hasn't started a game at Iowa. But Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa, redshirt sophomore out of Iowa, measured really well at the combine, has a lot of versatility. And so the lowest I've seen him, it's a mock draft on the NFL, NFL.com by Chad Reuter, but the lowest I've seen him go is 17. Most mocks I've seen has been anywhere from 15 to in the top 10. So, he could be a top 10 pick. So he's, Lucas Van Ness, his draft stock is really high right now. And so that's really good for him, really good for Iowa. Jackson Smith and Jigba, wide receiver out of Ohio State. I think I've seen one mock draft have him second round. Apart from that, I've seen 22. I've seen maybe he falls to 30, 31, goes to Kansas City Chiefs. But I've seen a lot of mocks where he goes top 12. So I think he has a bit more variation here, but he's most likely going to be a first-round pick. I think if he's not the first wide receiver taken, he's either number 2 or number 3. The only 2 wide receivers I can really see going ahead of him at this point, Jordan Addison out of USC. I think that'd be a mistake. I think he's a little overrated. And then I think the other guy that might creep up a little bit, Zay Flowers out of Boston College. He's got some. His draft stock has been rising fairly steadily. Quentin Johnson out of TCU is another one, but I feel pretty confident that JSN is going to be, if he's not the number 1 receiver, I don't think he's going to fall no more than the 3rd best receiver in this draft. And a lot of it is his change of direction, his ability to run routes. He's an excellent player. Don't let his 40 time distract you, or his lack of a 40 distract you, that he is the best route runner in this class. He is the shiftiest route runner, or shiftiest player in this class. Another guy who might creep into the first round, Adetomiwa Adebore. I'm going to butcher this name. Adebore out of Northwestern. Can you believe it? A 3-9 Northwestern team might have 2 first-round picks. He has not been in as many first-round mocks, but he has been in some. So that's another defensive lineman from the Big Ten that might creep in there. And then if you go a little bit further into some of this, Deonte Banks out of Maryland, another guy who could really creep up into that first-round range. Mozzie Smith out of Michigan, the nose tackle. He has gotten some first round buzz, although I don't think he will creep there, but I do think there's some potential. Maybe someone takes a flyer on him at the end of round 1. Sidney Brown out of Illinois, safety, is another one. Sam Laporta, tight end out of Iowa. I've seen a number of mock drafts with him in the first round. So you're getting a lot of variation. DeJuan Jones, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. Some have him dropping all the way to the 3rd round, but I've seen a number of mock drafts have him at the end of the first round, maybe getting taken by the Eagles or the Chiefs. More likely the Chiefs, if anybody. But so there's a lot of potential for players to kind of creep up. I've heard a little bit of buzz. I don't think this is going to happen. Zach Harrison out of Ohio State. He's an athletic freak, similar to Lucas Van Ness, except there's a lot more film on Zach Harrison. And so I'm not convinced that someone would take a flyer on him like they would Lucas Van Ness. But that being said, I think you could see anywhere from 8 to 12 Big Ten players make the first round, and then several more. Jack Campbell's another one out of Iowa. Some have him all the way down to the 3rd round, but then others have him possibly creeping up to the 1st round. There's not a lot of great linebackers in this class, and so I think there's a lot of potential here. I think alongside that, there's a lot of potential throughout the top 3 rounds. So guys that I don't think are going to sniff the first round, but I think could be high draft picks. Parker Washington out of Penn State, Jacorian Bennett out of Maryland, Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, Jair Brown out of Penn State, Jalen Duncan, offensive tackle for Maryland. Aiden O'Connell could really creep up out of Purdue. There's a lot of guys who you could see in rounds 2 and 3 that represent the Big Ten well, and that it just bodes well for the Big Ten and their credibility. Jartavius Martin is another one. John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota, the center. Luke Whippler out of Ohio State, the center for Ohio State. All of those guys have been projected somewhere in those top 3 rounds. So I look at this draft and I think it's a ringing endorsement for the Big Ten. So if you're a Big Ten fan, you should be excited because you're going to hear a lot of Big Ten names over the first 2 days of the draft. And that's exciting. I think the credibility and the buzz for the league is going up, even with the disappointment in the playoff. You've got a new commissioner. You've got the new deal coming with UCLA and USC in a year. You're transitioning networks to CBS, NBC, and Fox. A lot of buzz, a lot of good things, I think, happening for the Big Ten. Unfortunately, that does not translate to their track record with quarterbacks, in particular, Ohio State's track record with quarterbacks. Which gets me into the thing that I feel like I keep talking about and I keep banging my head against a wall. It's amazing how football does not affect draft stock, but rumors can tank draft stock. Here's what I mean. What has happened since the middle of March and now? Nothing. There's been a pro day. And by all accounts, CJ Stroud had one of the best pro days of any quarterback ever. Phenomenal. And at that point, everybody was convinced that Carolina was going to take him number 1 overall. Now, I'm on record, and I've been on record of this. I don't think you can go wrong with either Bryce or CJ. I think they're clearly 1A and 1B in the quarterback class. I don't know if either of them are elite. I don't think they're in the same discussion as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields were a couple years ago. I think they are both special players. And I think CJ is really, really good, but I think he has weaknesses. I think Bryce Young is really, really good. I think he has weaknesses. But I think out of this quarterback class, I think both of them can be really good in the NFL. I think they both can be really, really good in the league. I would pick them over several starters right now in the NFL to develop. But what has happened since the middle of March? Well, here's what's happened. Apparently, CJ Stroud is hard to coach. Michael Lombardi, former NFL executive, now he has a show, apparently, or he just tweets things. He decided to say that he heard from a source, in quotes, a source, that he's hard to coach. Really? Ironically, Michael Lombardi is the same guy who said he would take Davis Mills over Justin Fields. Listen, the guy's a Super Bowl exec. I'm just a guy with a podcast. Not going to make any interpretation here, but it's an interesting observation that he's not fond of Ohio State quarterbacks. You know, he trashed both of them. So he's hard to coach, apparently. By the way, Ryan Day can't fathom that. By the way, Ryan Day picked CJ Stroud over 3 other 4- and 5-star quarterbacks to be his starter for 2 years. And he had every reason to pull CJ Stroud. Every reason after the Oregon game back in 2021, and he didn't. Do you think that screams hard to coach? No. But okay, there's a source that says he's hard to coach, sure. Second thing that came out is apparently CJ Stroud ghosted the Manning Academy. He was invited to teach at Eli and Peyton Manning's quarterback camp, and he committed to it, and then he didn't. So maybe he doesn't have great character? Except Ryan Clark, NFL analyst, former NFL player, refuted this and says reports of this is not true. So where's it coming from? That's the question, isn't it? Where is it coming from? I'll get to that in a minute. Third thing, apparently there's this new test. The Wonderlic used to be the test where every player took it to check their cognition. They realized, well, that's a dumb test. Let's do this S2 test instead. And it evaluates your processing speed, your mental processing speed, which is important as a quarterback, okay? And the results got leaked, not released, they were leaked. And Bryce Young, for comparison, had a 94%, which was one of the highest ever, apparently, according to this leak. CJ Stroud scored an 18%. That's not good. It's not good, right? Except that the creator of the S2 test, who saw all the scores, said, oh, that leak isn't true. And actually all the top quarterbacks that took the test scored very highly. Now, he didn't say names, so maybe he doesn't consider CJ Stroud a top quarterback. But considering that CJ was considered the top quarterback for a hot minute, I would have to think that he was referring to CJ Stroud as one of those top quarterbacks. 3 reports, all false. Meanwhile, we have videos of verified Twitter accounts showing Will Levis throw from his bum 50 yards away, hitting the crossbar of the uprights behind the end zone, and say, look at his arm strength. Have we forgotten Jamarcus Russell? Do you remember that? Where everybody was like, oh, he should be the number 1 pick. You want to know why? Because he can throw 70 yards from his knees. Question. Can you score touchdowns by throwing from your knees? Can you do anything in football from your knees? Or from your butt? Like, no. But here's the insanity of this. We have to leak fake stories about a guy that's tanking his reputation, tanking his draft stock, while we have a guy who's actually could not beat Sean Clifford out at Penn State and was awful against a bad defense in Tennessee, legit bad. And we're looking at film and we're seeing all the inconsistencies. And instead of actually just looking at the film and saying, yeah, Will Levis has promise, but has some holes, we're looking at him and being like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. He's got great arm strength. Versus CJ, who has actually put on great film against great opponents. And we're saying we're using falsehoods to denigrate him so that he'll fall. Now, why? Matt Miller of ESPN made a great point. He's about one of the only level-headed media guys out there at this point, at least when it comes to draft season. He said, you always have to ask the question, who benefits the most from this information? Who benefits the most from these reports? Well, CJ Stroud certainly doesn't, at least from a financial standpoint and from a reputation standpoint. Ohio State certainly doesn't benefit from this because they want to break the narrative of Ohio State quarterbacks not being good, right? They want to break the curse. Plus, it always looks good for a university if you have a top 3 pick in the NFL draft. So who benefits from this the most? Well, most likely, it's going to be a team that wants CJ Stroud to fall. It's a team that really wants CJ, but they don't want to have to give up a lot to get him. And so there's a lot of buzz. The Carolina Panthers, I think, have kind of chosen Bryce Young. Then you've got the Houston Texans, who are not necessarily sold on CJ Stroud. That's the word on the street. They're not necessarily thinking about taking a quarterback. So what do? Character issues, man. Don't take him. Okay, well then who is doing this? Who might be leaking this? It might be the Colts. The Colts, I don't think he gets past 4, but there are reports that maybe the Colts like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson more. That's a mistake. We'll talk about that in a minute. But maybe it's the Raiders who could use a quarterback. Maybe it's the Falcons who could use a quarterback. Desmond Ridder, probably not it. Could be the Titans. Maybe it's the Jets all the way down at 13. I don't know. I would think it would have to be a team in that top 10. But again, maybe it's the Titans sitting there at 11 saying, maybe we can get him to fall. See if we can get him cheap or cheaper than we thought. Either way, while I think going to a better franchise and a better team would benefit CJ Stroud in some degree, I hate that this is what happens. I hate that this is what teams do to get what they want. Nobody is saying anything bad about the other top 3 quarterbacks. Like Bryce Young, and I love Bryce Young. I think he's great. But nobody talks about any of his flaws. Like whenever you bring up his size, it's like, well, he's like Drew Brees. Drew Brees is great. Bryce Young's great. I mean, yeah, I get that. But that's an actual football thing. Can he actually see over his linemen? That's an actual football thing. Will Levis, he is inaccurate. That's a problem. If you're a quarterback that's not accurate, that's a problem, right? Anthony Richardson, his last game in a rivalry game against a mid-Florida State team, went 7 of 21. And before you say, well, his receivers dropped some guys or dropped some passes, stop it. He still went 7 of 21. He still struggled to be accurate. Yes, I know he can jump out of the gym. Yes, I know he can run. I think he's got loads of potential. But every time someone logical brings up his inaccuracies, which is a thing you need to think about for quarterbacks, they're like, but look at his speed and, his receivers drop passes and da-da-da-da-da-da. With CJ, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, he had great receivers, he had a great offensive line, and let's make stuff up so that he tanks. It's absurd. And it's the same garbage that Justin Fields went through. And so maybe my Ohio State bias is showing a little bit here. But I think we all can say that the top 2 quarterbacks in the 2021 class were Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. You can make a little bit of an argument for Mac Jones, although he struggled quite mightily this year. But Zach Wilson? You mean the guy that Garrett Wilson trashed? Garrett Wilson was praying for Aaron Rodgers to sign with the Jets because he wants nothing to do with Zach Wilson? Trey Lance, who's injured all the time? And yet, everybody with half a brain knew that the 2 best quarterbacks from film, from attributes, characteristics, from the beginning of the 2020 season to the end of the 2020 season was Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And somehow, From August of 2020 to April of 2021, we convinced ourselves that Justin Fields was the fourth best prospect, maybe even the fifth best quarterback prospect in that class because of nothing. And we are doing the exact same thing to CJ Stroud. And it is not fair. And not only that, it's absurd. It's absurd. So here's my takeaway. I think CJ Stroud might end up benefiting from falling, first of all, because he will most likely go to a team that does not have as many holes. So if that happens, like, good for him. You know, for Aaron Rodgers, it was a very similar thing, right? He went all the way to the Packers at 23, even though he should have been the number one pick. That's just facts. But he didn't. He went 23, and you know what? He had a lot of good years with Green Bay, and he had a great infrastructure around him. I think that might happen to CJ if he falls past 4. Because let's be honest, if he goes to the Colts, he's going to get killed. If he went to Carolina, it'd be better because they're not completely in disarray. But if he goes to the Texans, eek. Like, as much as I would love to see CJ go number 2 overall in the draft, I don't want him anywhere near the Texans. They have not proven that they can be a helpful franchise ever. No, thank you. You know, the Colts, the Colts are not in a great place. The Raiders, You know, I think if he fell to the Titans, it'd be amazing. Now, granted, they are probably, I think they already moved Derrick Henry. If they haven't already, there's the rumor that he's going to the Eagles or that they're moving him somewhere. At the same time, I feel bad that no other player has endured more scrutiny and more false scrutiny in this draft cycle than CJ. And that's after getting so much scrutiny at Ohio State from both fans and from analysts alike. And it's nonsense. The whole reason why Ohio State struggled, for one, their defense was awful. And second, and I'm on record to say this, Ryan Day struggled as a play caller. Ryan Day abandoned the run when he shouldn't have. He struggled to run the ball because I don't know what was going on, but despite the fact that they had draft picks all up and down that line, they couldn't run the ball well. And that's on the offensive coordinator. That's on the offensive line coach. They were predictable on offense. The only game this year that they weren't, after the bye week, the only game they weren't predictable on offense for was the Georgia game. And when they actually called a good game, they put 41 points on the best defense in college football. And a lot of that is because CJ is amazing. He's ridiculous. His accuracy is ridiculous. Watch the film. Go back and watch that Georgia game. He is every bit as good as Bryce Young was against Georgia. And I'm talking about Bryce Young back in 2021. And you want to talk about it, the highest praise came from Kirby Smart and Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett, after that game, gave him the highest praise. Kirby Smart, the highest praise. If you get Kirby Smart's seal of approval, you're doing something right. All right? And so, do I think, would I pick CJ number 1? Yes. Without a question. And that's recognizing that I think Bryce is just as good. And I can understand why Carolina would pick Bryce number 1. I have no problem with Bryce going number 1. But these mock drafts that have Will Levis going number 2 is absurd to me. It's absurd. Not because Will Levis is a bad kid, not because he's a bad prospect, but you're going to tank CJ Stroud's draft stock to elevate a guy who often did not complete 60% of his passes in games against mid-competition. It makes no sense. This has been the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. Make sure to get our reaction after the NFL draft. This is Zach signing off. Take care. God bless.